Can I just give you a brief overview of the speakers? I won't go to their very lengthy and impressive bios. They're in the conference program for you to look at. We're going to hear from the speakers in turn as they're on this panel. Firstly, from the New South Wales Police, Detective Superintendent Robert Critchlow. Secondly, from the Victorian Police, Libby Murphy, Superintendent Family Violence Command. Thirdly, from the Queensland Police, Inspector Regan Carr, Officer in Charge, Domestic Family Violence and Vulnerable Persons Unit. Then from Susan Summers from across the sea, from New York, former New York State Attorney, with a perspective on policing models outside Australia. And Susan, I'll add, is the President of the International Network for Prevention of Elder Abuse, so her background in this area is long-standing and well-regarded. Dimitri Bouras will follow her up with his views as a caseworker and counsellor with PRONIA, Aged and Coordinated Care Services. Dimitri, sorry, I'm not sure where you're from. It's not on my list.
PRONIA, also known, formerly known as Australian Greek Welfare.
Okay, thank you, Dimitri. And then last but not least from Harry Cutmore, Oxley in New South Wales, Local Area Command, Aboriginal Liaison Officer. So you can see, without delving into their bios, we find ourselves with a wealth of experience, both in demographic and in intellect and approach. We're hearing from a mix of people who come from policing and from community perspectives. So I'm going to hand over now to Rebecca to give you some context. We're going to keep speakers to about 5 to 7 minutes, and we're going to 5 minutes. We're going to encourage discussion. So whilst we look like a school bus or a classroom at the moment, feel free to break out of that and get involved. I'll hand over to Rebecca now.
Thank you, Bill. I'm so thrilled to see so many of you here because we have a very distinguished panel. The panel, Elder Abuse and Policing, what is the best practice? It's really critical, I think, for us to understand the role that policing plays within the community. We want to think about education in terms of prevention, community relations, and then, of course, the responses. And so we're going to ask each of our speakers in turn to tell us a little bit about the issues facing their community regarding elder abuse and how their community's program or response works. And as Bill said, we're going to ask each of them to keep their responses to 5 minutes. And then after they've each done that, we have a series of questions we want to ask them for purposes of discussion, but we're not wedded to our list of questions. It's just in the event nobody has any questions from the floor, we have questions. And we have a microphone in the back. And so if you have a question or a comment that you want to make, we also have, Charlotte has a microphone up here. This is where they're going to work on getting their 10,000 steps today. And so if you have a comment or question, do you want them to try to come to the center aisle or just raise your hand and we'll get the microphone to you. So with that, we're going to turn it over. If you would start first, thank you.
Morning, everyone. Nice to see so many friends here. There's lots of people that I've worked with, and that's probably the theme of what we're going to talk about is the need for partnerships in policing and human services and health to take on this issue. I'd like to reinforce the acknowledgement of country that's been offered several times today, especially my colleague Harry down there is a champion. You'll get to know him. But yeah, I'm Rob Critchlow. I'm the Commander of the Hills Local Area Command, but I also have a long-standing corporate responsibility for issues in relation to the response to abuse of older people. On that, we don't use the term elder abuse in New South Wales Police Force anymore. We use the term abuse of older people to really respect Indigenous elders and those communities that have formal roles of elders. And it's a topic that's been well researched, and I think there's enough evidence to support that contention, and that's the language that we use. It also has the unintended effect of some older people don't see themselves as elders or elderly. The whole concept of age, which is something we're having trouble getting our heads around, is the flexibility and elasticity of what age actually is. So in the police force, we really focus on the issues of vulnerability, and that age is a number, but vulnerability is a problem. So there are people in our, and the question was, what's the situation in our community jurisdiction? Well, New South Wales is so vast and varied that it's very hard to pinpoint what the issues really are because it's everything, and we've got communities in this area of the highest socioeconomic status in the country with the greatest resources. Don't click your tongue, Victoria. It's always so competitive. When I was in the drug squad, I was always chasing drugs, and they've got better drugs than Victoria Police and New South Wales Police. We have amongst the highest levels of socioeconomic advantage in the country, and also amongst the lowest. So she's not arguing for that one. But we do have areas of great disadvantage. We have every community of every origin from the country represented in our state. So it's very, very diverse. So the effects of ageing vary, and some people that have resources and advantages can be in very healthy, vigorous ageing till very late in their lives, 80s, 90s. My wife's grandfather, who's had lunch with us yesterday, is 97 and still drives and was jogging until recently. Other people who have drug and alcohol problems and live in some remote communities can suffer from age-related vulnerability in their 40s and 50s. So we're very careful with that term of language. So on that, we have a role in policing that people tend to listen to us, which is a very powerful position to be in. And they tend to want our advice and want our engagement, which is something we really respect and value. What we do have going for us in policing in New South Wales is we have representation in every community in every part of the state. So we, in our business as usual, come into contact with lots of people, and we have the chance to either resolve problems or intervene as early as we can. And our focus again is moving towards early intervention. I've got 2 minutes left. And that really fits in with what we've seen in the fields of child abuse and domestic violence. We refer to abuse of older people as a third major wave of social dysfunction that we're looking at. Talk about hidden problems. Child abuse was a hidden problem for a long time. We've been through many reforms and repairs to that. Royal Commissions, which we're just having reports coming down now about abuse of children in formal and home settings. Domestic violence obviously was an issue that was seen as family business and not spoken about publicly, and we're countering that. And I think abuse of older people dovetails in well in that continuum of abuse. What's very clear and what we're very concerned about is that by the time people come to us, it's generally too late. If an older person's harmed physically or suffers major financial loss, their rates of mortality go up dramatically. In some studies from New York, I'm sure my colleague can speak about that, from Mark Lax, show a 300% increase in mortality from an older person suffering any form of abuse. So something I'm concerned about is that often, the rhetoric is, it's just they've just been defrauded, they've lost money, but then resolves in psychological harm, especially if it's a family member, which can hasten the physical decline, which can bring on premature death. So these issues are very, very complex and interrelated. We try and take a leadership role, or I do make a leadership role on behalf of the cops to make sure our frontline responders are as informed and as respond as sensitively as possible. And often that means engaging other services and referring our clients and customers to the best possible services, which often isn't the police. So we're very happy to do our job when we have to, but it's better for us is if responses are done early in a sensitive way by the best possible provider to prevent that harm happening, which can then hasten an early death in an older person. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Libby Murphy, and as the introducers have stated, I'm from Family Violence Command of Victoria Police. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respect to elders past, present and future. I'm really pleased to be here and thankful for the opportunity to actually talk about some of the work that we're doing within Victoria Police. But having said that, I also would like to say that we know that we've got a long way to go. We've probably been fairly fortunate in Victoria in terms of having the most resources, Rob. We come off the back, as everyone in the room will know, of a Royal Commission in Victoria where there was a number of submissions by various people, and I'm sure some of the people here in this room gave some of those submissions and have contributed to where Victoria Police is moving in terms of elder abuse and what the Commission has recommended. In line with that, the Victorian Government established what was called Family Safety Victoria as a standalone agency to manage family violence in Victoria, and there is certain components within Family Safety Victoria who actually focus specifically on elder abuse. From a Victoria Police perspective, I can say that within our Priority Communities Division we actually do have a portfolio holder of elder abuse, and that person, Dani Houseman, is here today. Put up your hand please, Dani. So within our Priority Communities Division, Family Violence Command works specifically with Dani, who is our conduit to the community, although having said that we actually do a lot of work ourselves, and I'll talk about a specific recommendation of the Royal Commission in relation to elder abuse. We're probably lucky because we have our own Family Violence Command within Victoria Police. established post the Royal Commission recommendations. And to give you some sense of how Victoria Police sees family violence, including elder abuse, we saw fit to establish our own command in terms of, so we actually have it there in terms of similar to a crime command or a counter-terrorism command, so it is that much of a focus for us that we created a specific command. And I think we are the only state in Australia who does have it. Hopefully others will follow.
You've got a budget.
We did get a budget, true. Okay, we're very lucky. So what Victoria Police is doing is, with our budget, moving forward, and we're probably in a very enviable position at the moment where we are actually about to roll out a whole 518 resources across the state of Victoria dedicated to family violence specifically. Now, 415 of those are sworn police members. All but 46 of those are actually going to be detectives. So we've established new detective positions. So again, we see it in terms of this is serious enough and this is important enough that we will deploy detectives such as those within Crime Command and Counter-Terrorism Command to ensure that family violence is a focus. Those 415 detectives will be across the state of Victoria, led by Detective Senior Sergeants in crews. We're about to release our concept of operations, which is the framework for what those detectives will do. And part of that concept, other than high risk and medium risk offenders and a cold case methodology, which again I think we're the only people in Australia doing, is around vulnerable people, and we're much like New South Wales in terms of that. So we understand people's vulnerabilities and we understand that people, or older people, are vulnerable. So that will be part of our charter, and members will and must focus on elder abuse to ensure it is front and centre. So I'll quickly go to recommendation 155, which is about trialling elder abuse teams. So we plan to do that at locations as part of the rollout with the investigative unit. So that we will gather data, examine our framework and actually see what results we'll have, and we will do it over a methodology that is consistent and probably over about a 6 to 12 month period. So we're very much looking forward to seeing what results that will bring and what improvements we can make, and hopefully have a more holistic approach going forward.
Okay, thank you. Regan Carr from the Queensland Police. As indicated, I'm the actual state coordinator for the QPS from the strategic operational perspective, and I manage what they call the Domestic Family Violence and Vulnerable Persons Unit. That name in itself probably tells a story. The reality of it is 2 years ago, actually no, it's going on 3 years ago, we had in Queensland the Not Now Not Ever report, which was regard to the Bouras recommendations. It was looking at abuse across our vulnerable, marginalised people in our communities. Two of those, there was 140 recommendations, and 121 of those were specific for government and the rest were to the community. And I think that in itself, when we acknowledge it, it's not anything we do alone. I think what we're looking here, when looking at our people, of our vulnerabilities, be it elder abuse, be it called community, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people, it is not government, it's not NGO, it's not communities, it's a collaborative approach, hand in hand, the journey we go along. And the thing that I think that we've learnt in Queensland since we set it up, in 2015, we had a look at the recommendations. 2 of those recommendations were specific to elder abuse. And our Commissioner, we decided in our, with our police service that we needed a far bigger footprint in this. And I have here my Senior Sergeant, Lisa Watton, who's the Specialist Project Officer for Elder Abuse. So effectively wanted to have a look at it, but one of the things that I think we looked in the unit, as I said, I do DV, I do mental health, I do disabilities, I do suicide prevention. Everyone has a connection. Every one of them all intersects, and every one of them, the police certainly, we're 24/7, but we cannot do it alone. So the greatest thing I think that we can bring to the table, I learned even this morning, yes, it's about disruption, but it's also about looking beyond and not always saying, what can I do for the Queensland Police Service, to how we respond better. The greatest thing that we can give, I think, to the community is our partnerships. And it's really actually telling our members When you go to any front door or when you answer any call, you could be saving someone's life. And that's what it's all about, as simple as that. So we've actually put a lot of time and investment in really looking at us in our cultural change, in how we respond to our community. We got quite a few criticisms through the Not Now, Not Ever in how we do respond to some of the things that are probably thought to be just your day-to-day. Majority of our first response officers' calls will be to a domestic violence, will be to the disturbances or mental health issues. Majority of those people will be our most vulnerable people in our community, and they need the best response at the first port of call. So we spent a lot of time at doing a lot of training. We've had 2 intensive full-day rollout of training for vulnerable persons. Not so much about legislation. We can do that. That's our bread and butter. But it's actually talking about engagement, looking at the key messages. How do you understand it? How do you probe? And really looking at behind closed doors, because every door and behind closed doors has a story. So that's a journey we're on. We've actually gone out the first time, I think, for us as an organisation. We go on to tender. We're actually employing an independent organisation, a cultural change coach, to come into our organisation with an assessment to see how far we've come along our journey in responding to elder abuse. I have a vested interest in it because I'm not far off at the moment, so I want to make sure that we're actually on the right path. There's a lot that we can talk about, but the idea, I think, today, it's the connections we have, and it's the connections we have with our communities, it's connections we have with our business partners, it's connections we have with government, and it's connections we have with the NGO, and all of it is basically, the one thing I've learnt over the few years is actually sitting back and asking, what do you want in the community? How can we respond to you better? And it's not always telling people what we often do in plans and actions, but actually just taking a breath and taking a bit of time to listen. So I think that's one of the things I've learned along this journey is sometimes I think people, we would agree, have probably been over-researched. There's more plans, there's more things there than you can think of. So sometimes it's a matter of taking a breath, having what we have got, working with my colleagues, as we all do. I've got Sue from WA Police down there. We're all on national committees. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel sometimes. We need to have a look at what we do have, because technology allows those doors to be open. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Thank you. I'm Susan Summers, and I'm currently representing the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. And I am an attorney, a New York State attorney, but I think they left a word or two off. I think it was supposed to refer to the fact that I had been working in the Attorney General's office at one point in my experience, and I led a group, a unit of elder protection, which was a unique thing that we started in New York. But of course, I'd like to join with all of you in thanking your traditional people that allow you and allow me to be here on these lands. And I'm very touched that this is something that's remembered at all times. And I know one of your bills come to New York sometimes, and others have come, and they've always acknowledged the elders in your country. And I think that really helps us to maintain the respect that we should have for others and for our elders. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate being here. I want to tell you a little bit from my perspective, of an international perspective, on issues with regards to policing and addressing elder abuse. And I'm really glad to hear some of the comments, and I could tell very much the depth of the Chief's information and really some passion I think I have felt come through there. And you know it. When you know it, you hear it, and then you really know it. And I think he's got it, which I'm really pleased. And I heard some other things talking about partnership and community and talking to others and listening to what they have to say. And if we incorporate all of these issues into our work, I think it'll be easier on all of us and we'll be more effective. I'm pleased to see that some of the issues that we've addressed, perhaps in the US, in Canada, I brought some information on Italy. I'm half Italian, so, you know, I have to play it up. to talk to you about some of the approaches that they've had. In the U.S., of course, I'm most familiar with that. And as our co-chair, she could tell you probably more than I could ever, because she developed many of the programs. And I think I was at your specialized elder courtroom that you have. Yes, I have a special elder abuse courtroom at her college, university. And so in reviewing our policy and practices, we have developed different things. And we have a program of adult protective services or protective services for adults, which you also heard mentioned this morning when Professor Morgan spoke about the two avenues of address for elder abuse. And so from that context of PSA, we have a program in New York called PSA in the Police. And we have a statute that helps us to work together. And we also have statutes with regards to good faith reporting, so that a person who reports on a voluntary basis in our state is protected if it's a good faith report. And most of them are good faith reports. And that was also issued this morning, an issue this morning of reporting and how the information comes to the attention of police. And we heard a moment ago that sometimes it just comes too late. So we have some practices of working together with the community. And then across our nation, we have national sheriff's associations, and we have other chiefs of police who come together and work in a triad. And the triad program is a very effective program because it brings together senior citizens and the police and does trainings in voluntary situations and informs them about issues to protect themselves and empower them to help protect their friends and neighbors in the community. And using the word community, we really do see this as a community affair. And we have to have all of these pieces work together and customize that response to different cultures within our culture. And I think I hear some of that happening here too, so that's pleasant. I can tell you some more about specifics, or I can give you some handout or something with regards to particular programs and some research and some findings in other country that I hope that in your review, I heard you have these new reports and commissions, and I went to the elder abuse, the EAAA last evening, and that initiative, and I hope that you incorporate some of the learnings, the good and the bad, some of the failures and some of the successes, so that you don't reinvent the wheel and that you're more successful quicker, because we know what the result is if we delay. So thank you, and I'll talk to you again.
Good morning. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, this very welcoming land to all cultures. I have been working for PRONIA, formerly known as Australian Greek Welfare, an organisation which was established in 1972, so we're the same age. Elder abuse within the CALD community, and more specifically the Greek community. Elderly women, usually from of Greek descent, tend to report cases of elder abuse on average once per week. In 2015, the reports of elder abuse were as frequent as once every 3 to 4 days. More specifically, we had 75 reports of elder abuse in 2015. 38 of these incidents involved an elderly woman reporting the abuser, which was typically the son, who had crystal meth addiction issues. 2015 was the year where nearly the reports from elderly Greek women to Greek welfare regarding the abusing son doubled. Greek welfare, PRONIA, displays flexibility in many cases. There are very many cases where the caseworker plays also the counsellor's role, plays the advocate's role, plays the administrator of emergency relief role, plays the interpreter role when dealing with the police. Usually, the Greek community refrains from reporting. There are many cultural barriers which prohibit reporting, such as lack of basic knowledge, systemic knowledge, language barriers, the tendency to isolate and insulate the family tragedy, because it is viewed within a Greek family, elder abuse and domestic violence, as a major tragedy, which is another culturally, culturally diverse factor of reporting is the elderly mother wanting the caseworker, mostly myself, to befriend the abuser, that is the son, and for the caseworker to lead the son on the path of virtue. Unfortunately, this cannot happen. It is because of my background. My father is Greek, but my mother's of Celtic and Austrian background. I never was subjected to, not subjected to, I never had the honour, or I never received this unconditional love many of these abusers have received from their mothers. And that is another reason where I have witnessed generally a lack of reporting. In 2015, however, there were 75 reports. Out of these 75 reports, 12 women, elderly women of first-generation background, engaged with the police, and 6 intervention orders were placed. On average, that was 400% more intervention orders than the outcomes I witnessed since 2009. Other main factors for elderly Greek-speaking people not reporting typically their abusive son are also religious reasons. Usually, many of these Greek women look up to the local priest, and typically they expect some sort of miracle. I do believe, however, that with constant community education and with partnerships growing, such as PRONIA's collaboration with the Housing Hold the Aged Action Group, that there is not only a glimmer of hope for the future, but within the next 10 years there will be more reporting and more intervention orders being placed. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. I too would like to acknowledge country. My name's Harry Cutmore. I've been employed as the Aboriginal Liaison Officer for New South Wales Police and deliver that service in Tamworth, which is the Oxley LAC, and I cover 4 or 5 communities, and there's quite an area between those communities, and the diversity in those communities is also quite enormous. I'd just like to speak on, I guess, the Aboriginal strategic policy, Aboriginal strategic plan for, which is the policy that New South Wales Police have and that we implement. And I guess for our people, police were the enforcers of government policy in the past, which led to a lot of mistrust and placed a lot of barriers between our people and also the cops. So that education comes down, or we assist in that education on policy and procedure, explaining that to our people to ensure that they utilise the service that the cops deliver, and also to the cops about our people and how to approach our people and our young people and assist in breaking down those barriers. The Aboriginal Strategic Direction gives us the opportunity to have regular conversations and engage our communities. And when I talk about our communities, that's from our young people to our elders, and somewhere along the line in that, the young people lose respect for elders, and our older people start striking a lot of hurdles, and young people assist in some of that, you know. So But as I was saying, like for me, it's the regular conversation to have with our people so that they can participate in conversations, place recommendations up to the cops so that they can consider those in policy change. And it gives our people and also the senior police accessibility to each other so that they that confidence can grow, so that the senior police are talking to the young blokes and also so are the community as well. Certainly it gives, at our police Aboriginal community consultative meetings, we have a lot of service providers there as well, which gives us the opportunity for those services that are delivered to our community, hopefully some coordination so that those issues that aren't our responsibility, it certainly gives our community the accessibility to others. So inside the police also there's the opportunity for Aboriginal staff to come together so that we can make change from within as well, and we have quite a number of Aboriginal police ranging from junior constables up to local area commanders. So we get together on a regular basis, speak about any issues that may be affecting us that will impact on our community, and we get that grassroots coming up to the top end. So that's pretty much it. So if there's any other questions with the others, happy to answer. So thank you.
Thank you all so very much, and I'm so impressed they were on time. It was wonderful, although Charlotte holding up the big sign probably was helpful there. We're going to open it up to the audience, hopefully that you'll have some questions, but while we're thinking in the audience about your questions, we're thinking that maybe Danny, might you offer a few comments? Please. I call on people for a living.
I noticed another Victoria Police representative.
Sure. Hi, my name's Dani House and I'm the Seniors Portfolio Manager with Victoria Police. And as Libby said, I work really, really closely with our Family Violence Command. I guess I'm effectively the organisational subject matter expert on elder abuse. And so I work out with community and then deliver all of that messaging back into Family Violence Command about what are some of the issues that are going on, and what is it that we need to do as an organisation so that we can be better prepared to train our members to respond to elder abuse and also to help identify it. So how can we link in with community members who might be vulnerable or isolated, who might be at risk of elder abuse, and what is it our family violence units can actually do to better support them, to have confidence to report to police, and for us to then respond appropriately in a way that breaks down those barriers and those ideas that police are just going to come in and arrest people, which we know is one of the huge barriers for older people reporting to police. And so working with community around that's not necessarily what police are going to do, that's not necessarily what we want to do. We want to keep people together, but mostly we just want to keep people safe.
Okay, so audience. Anybody? All right. So Charlotte, start your steps here.
Thank you. It was an excellent presentation. My name is Anju, and I'm a dementia consultant. One of the questions, and perhaps even a remark, is, as it was mentioned, that a lot of elderly people don't see themselves as elderly, and from my experience, a lot of communities, called communities, they do not even see elder abuse as elder abuse. And as you all can appreciate, there are cultures within cultures, and it is a community which is totally unguarded. There is no documentation unlike in a residential aged care. The community is the one where people are out there absolutely open. So my question to you are the experts, what are the challenges you face in working with called communities? where it's very good. Dimitri's community, Greek community, they are ringing once a week. There is a phone call, but I know of so many called communities where they do not even want to talk about it. It's a big no-no to talk about these things. So how would you address the challenges faced that you guys are working with called communities, and how can we all work better? How can the information for the work you guys do reach the community? As we all know, it's a converted sitting here. So how does your work reach the called communities that if there is elder abuse, this is what you do? Thank you.
Who would like to take the question? All of you?
I might jump in because Andrew's one of my friends, and I've done some work with her, and I think that she's probably a good exemplar of what we need to work with coal communities, is internal advocacy. So it's very easy from a government point of view to come top down and outside in to sort of impose expectations and rules, but unless communities have goodwill and openness to engage with the government from a sort of organic point of view, it doesn't work. And in my experience in the Hills, I've been very, very fortunate to have advocates such as Anju and Shubha Kumar's here as well today from the India Club, and they take a real grassroots approach to this issue in that they make it easy to discuss, and then they invite members of the government, you know, in my case myself, to come and speak to them and talk about some of these issues. And it's then incumbent upon us then to make sure our communications are right, that it's sensitive, that it's informed, that we're not, not preaching to that particular group. And it's also important too for cold groups to understand that the issues are universal. It's not just an Indian issue or a Greek issue or a Chinese issue. Any community that's not of the mainstream have their own internal pressures, and it's that balance between long-standing practices and rules and cultural norms and how that fits into the society. So I think that the barriers to reporting are significant, and it's something we work on all the time. Allowing cultural norms to subsume wider community norms is something that's got to be dealt with as well in a respectful way. And from our point of view too, I think when you work in this field, you get to know the nuances and, for example, issues surrounding family reunion in the community in particular, where parents are brought back from the home country to unite the family, which is lovely, and to support the children and engage in their education, which is great. And the next thing you know, they're unpaid sort of slaves, hidden in the back room of the house with no communication, no language skills, no connection to culture or faith, and totally isolated and abused. And it's very, very universal. It's not just one particular group. And when you share those experiences from that wider focus, I think it works very well. But without the strength and the courage of members of the community, I give Andrew my respects, then any faith group or cultural group, it's very hard for us to come top down and outside in. I think it's very important to build those partnerships from within.
From a Queensland perspective, like we're just in one district, we've got over 240 different cultures. And I think what is important that we've learnt in particular is you've got to actually be in the community. We always remind our members that yes, Monday to Friday or whatever, or your 3-shift rosters, your blue uniform, but in actual fact when you finish, you go home and you live in that community. The community we police is our community as well. So it's really incumbent upon us to respectfully know and understand the people who are our neighbours and what they're experiencing. And I think that over the years we're getting a lot better at it. I really do believe that most of our members, because Queensland's a lot different, we go from the whole east coast, the further away you get from the southeast corner, the less you're going to have of services available. Who you will have available will be your police, education and health. And people like that, they're the ones who need to be collected collegially together to be there for the members there. Particularly when you go to places around up north, around Mount Isa, all those sorts of areas, it's very isolated. And we're starting to see probably with a lot of new immigrant women and men, but also too, they've got their parents that have been so isolated that probably we don't even know that they're there with their families sometimes. So we have to be very cognizant of exploring and going through that and educating. So we've made it very strong within our organisation, particularly through our vulnerable persons training, to really look at your marginalised groups. And your marginalised groups for us will be the called community. And we have to be part of it. We've got community policing boards, all these things. And you're right, we can't be there as a police officer, sometimes you just got to be part of the community, and that's what it's all about, to have that confidence. The best relationships you can have in any of these things is your informal relationships. That confidence that you can make a phone call and you know that something's going to be done. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about that networking. And that even government, you can be the bystander to do something for you.
Thanks. I think, and I completely agree with Rob and Regan in terms of the community, and you can't underestimate the power that exists in community and knowing people. At Victoria Police, we've tried to do a fair bit of work in relation to members' understanding of cultural communities. We've recently established a Centre of Family Violence as part of our training education at the Academy. And that Centre of Family Violence is, amongst other things, looking at vulnerable groups, including cultural groups. And some of our training focuses around the isolation, the things to look out for in terms of actually asking questions about visas and people's dependency on other people when members go to these situations, understanding cultural and religious barriers, understanding that many people within COLD communities actually stereotype police in their own particular way, so don't trust us, which is fine, but we've actually got a real opportunity in terms of this Centre of Family Violence and making our members, our 14,500 strong workforce, understand that there's a whole lot of issues that underpin in terms of religious and cultural barriers, and I think that that will go other than the community and knowing the community, but making sure members look out for the things that they're supposed to look out for at family violence incidents so we get the best picture and actually know how to help.
Okay, just before we go back to the audience, I wondered if Sue from Western Australia, do you have anything you'd like to offer, Sue? You don't have to, of course. You might want to brag about how much better it is than Victoria or New South Wales.
No, it's Victoria who has all the resources. Everybody knows that, Libby. Yeah, look, for us, elder abuse obviously is like everyone, it's an emerging issue. And I guess one of the queries that I would have, or one of the issues we have in the policing context, is that we are very much geared up around law enforcement. It is our primary role. And it's the greys that are involved in this issue around what constitutes elder abuse. So when we jump into that neglect space or into some of those spaces, it creates a problem, I guess, for our frontline officers about who do we talk to, who do we make connections with, where do we refer this issue off because we don't have the skill sets to deal with it. So I think that's an ongoing issue, certainly for police in a crisis response. So I often describe police as we're a fairly blunt kind of tool that the community have. We turn up, we have some fairly specific roles that we undertake. And when we start getting into the grey of elder abuse, it creates problems for us in terms of where do we go to and how do we manage this ourselves. So it's certainly an ongoing issue for Western Australia in terms of how we respond to it. So I absolutely agree it's about creating our partnerships and breaking down those silos of information. The area in which I work is also family violence, and we often have long discussions about what we can and can't tell each other in those debates between government, not-for-profit sector, community sectors about what information can we share and what can't we share, and that sometimes bogs down the conversation. I know my destiny is to get into trouble because I just go, here it is. Let's just work out a solution. So, you know, at some point in the future that will probably bite me, but ultimately it's about the safety of individuals, and so it's about providing the best care that we can.
Okay, we've got one over there, and then we're going to go, after that, Charlotte will go over. Thank you.
This question is to the police representatives and relates particularly to financial abuse, which tends to be the poor cousin in the lexicon of elder abuse. From a police service point of view, do you keep statistics on the number of criminal offences you charge financial elder abusers with? And if so, what do those statistics indicate? If you don't keep those statistics, is there a problem with the criminal law in terms of prosecution not occurring in the financial elder abuse space?
I do have an answer.
Well, okay, who's the highest, we're going to do it this way. Who's the highest ranking law enforcement officer? He'll
Can
start.
I just add, You might consider the question in the context of the conventional criminal financial offences such as fraud, misappropriation and stealing. Are they good enough in themselves to address the subtleties of financial elder abuse, or do we need new laws to address it?
My very good friend Rodney Lewis is here somewhere. Is he in the room today? Elsewhere. Okay. You need to find Rodney Lewis. He's drafted a whole statute. We are so far behind the curve on the management of financial misbehaviour, especially around older people. It's pardon the pun, criminal. We don't keep data well in relation to abuse of older people because of the limitations I alluded to early on. When do they become an older person in the terms of vulnerability? And I've made recommendations of law reform. See, my ribbon's about law reform because it's a mess. I love these ribbons; they're really cool. But you know, we don't keep it well. We don't prosecute it well. Often, if someone lacks capacity, which then leads them down the path going towards someone like Tom, of course, someone lacks capacity to make good decisions. The police don't handle it well. A case was brought to me in the Northern Beaches of Sydney, which in a nutshell saw a lady defrauded of $6 million. So her husband died, left $1 million to her and her 3 children, and a $2 million house for her to live in. She received an eviction notice because she hadn't paid her rent, and she'd lived there for 40 years. So her son, who was a disbarred lawyer, stole the $3 million, the $4 million belonging to each of the family members, and then sold the house. Now, it took Rodney's advocacy to me to get the local police to actually respond to that, because they just could not get their heads around the fact that it was an offence and they were involved, because the woman had dementia, had no capacity. She was installed as the director of a company, and she had no capacity whatsoever. So a number of very serious offences which were not handled well, and it's because it's very, very confronting for a young constable on the front counter to have someone walking with a multi-million-dollar complex fraud with a victim ostensibly lacking capacity. We don't handle it well at all, and it really needs a whole suite of changes. And I said I advocate the work of Rodney Lewis to those that know him, and those that don't, go and meet him, because it needs some reform. The data we keep is very poor, because it's very hard to identify who's a vulnerable person under these terms in the current systems. It's a massive, massive gap. And as I alluded to again before, it's just finance, but there's no such thing as just a financial abuse. It's the precursor of other things. It feeds into isolation. And in Sydney, when we have really high house prices, you want to argue that one? As a higher, we have older people living longer, and our friends at the helpline talk about inheritance and patience. That desire to get access to the equity in a house they have nothing to do with, that someone bought for £10,000 after the war, that's now worth $3.5 million, and they either hasten to death or don't prevent the death to get access to that cash, and we don't handle it well at all as a policing response. Not good news, I'm afraid.
You want to? Would any of the other? Susan, thank you.
Thank you. I'm really glad you asked that question about financial exploitation, because in my experience, in New York State, at least 60% of the cases that came to our attention were financial exploitation. But let me tell you, we never had a case that there wasn't something else going on. Mm-hmm. There's never, in my estimation, unless it's a telemarketer, which also is not isolated, because it can be financial exploitation together with emotional and psychological exploitation of an individual. An example is I received a handwritten letter once at my office on the school paper, from the years ago. The little letter, and this woman wrote to me, and she told me that she was desperate. She had heard me speak at a senior citizen center, and she was desperate because they knew where she lived. Mm-hmm. She had given them everything, and they were demanding more. So this issue of financial exploitation is a huge, important issue. And not just in the US, but in many other countries, in the UK and in Germany, it's the same problem. It works the same way. It works the same way in Japan. Somebody will sell the house of that little old lady next door who has no son, no children to protect her. I'm going to buy your house, take care of you, and next thing you find her living in the shed in the back. Mm-hmm. And so it's a worldwide problem, and the approaches to it are very difficult indeed, but it's not as difficult to pursue as sometimes police and prosecutors believe. I mean, they can do a gun case. They can do a homicide. They can do a drug case. So I have a manual on how to do a drug case and a gun case. All I do is read the book, and I go into court, and I can basically follow the recipe. So we started to train and to write some recipes on how to do a financial exploitation case. And I found that prosecutors wanted to do it. The police wanted to do it. They really, really care. And just giving them a little tool and helping them, they did the rest. Not that it's perfect, but they certainly took off from there. So I think it's important for us to support our services through the academic world and education to help them have better tools to do their jobs.
Great, thank you. And I think did we still have one over here, and then we'll come over here, and that'll probably be about the last question we can maybe not.
Oh, hi, look, my name is Tara Simpson. I'm a solicitor from the Legal Services Commission of South Australia. And my question actually follows very well with the comments that's been made. In South Australia, our Disability Justice Plan introduces a training program for all those involved in the justice system. So this is the police, the judges, the lawyers, and in particular, how to interview vulnerable witnesses. So my question relates to the pointy end, when offences have been created. And although at the moment in our state the focus are with young children and people with disability, my view is it's got a wider application, particularly to older people with early onset dementia, because what this training program is designed to do is to equip police officers, judges and lawyers to be able to get the narrative and the story from a vulnerable witness so that their story is heard, respected, valued, so that older people are not disregarded as not having anything credible to say. So I guess my question is this: in the other states, do you have some similar programs that are starting up so that older people can be heard and their story can be told?
We certainly do in Victoria. It came out of our sex offences and child abuse team that formerly sat in Crime Command but now sits within Family Violence Command. And we have a fellow who's a psychologist by the name of Patrick Tidmarsh, who has done some fabulous work in terms of understanding whole story and eliciting and evoking information from specific sorts of witnesses, including children, and that's now spread to in terms of actually people with disabilities, obviously because we use video and audio recording evidence, so we actually don't take written statements for obvious reasons. And that whole story approach actually makes you understand that we understand, as you would know, that people with disabilities actually may have problems with recollection and the way that they understand these things. And Patrick is working for us to actually develop what we're loosely at this stage calling, because we haven't actually labelled it yet, the inside story to actually understand the dynamics within a house and what that means to people who have dementia or elder abuse issues or those sorts of things. So that's certainly something that we're adopting and have an approach on moving forward.
Okay, and then do we have, Charlotte, time for one more question? She says yes. All right.
Hi. This is a question for the panel. I'm Sangeeta from Capacity, and a few years ago we got funding to develop an e-tool for the banking industry to pick up red flags of financial abuse of people with dementia and cognitive decline, and that could have sort of followed on with all the aging issues. My question is that with that sort of a e-tool, it was a very short e-tool which was for normal people in the front line of the banking, branches and stuff. Would the police be willing to have something similar for their staff who deals with this thing, to teach them how they can pick up these at an early stage so that they can then have data and develop programs accordingly to deal with this situation and to make it actually legal for people who do financial abuse, children of their parents, etc.
I think we'd welcome anything that actually improved.
Have you had this sort of a training program?
As part of our risk assessment, different things and indicators, which you would be exactly the same.
We have what they call a protective assessment framework, and we're also working across government with a common risk assessment framework. And it's basically identifying your indicators sorry, your indicators of vulnerability, what we're looking for. We're actually in the process of just reassessing what we've got at the moment. And basically, it's for our first response officers that gives you all your indicators. That would be there, similar to what was indicated this morning in the earlier session, you know, of what you'd be looking for. And that's something that all of our members use. At the moment, we're just looking at the professional judgment and overlay, so they know when they're going to something, they can pick something up there with that. So it's a protective assessment framework.
So it's rolled out already, because I mean, I feel there's hardly any data when it comes to picking up, you know, knowing about how much there is out there and whether you can actually charge people on financial abuse.
So you're looking at statistics on the actual persons?
I mean, according to what I heard earlier on, there wasn't much data there, you know, technically to actually go and charge people if you found there was financial abuse. So I'm just wondering if that training program has been helpful and,
so,
you know,
I think all police jurisdictions across, well, from what my colleagues across Australia, we all have specific training. Like we're now looking at us for domestic and family violence, we do what we call a vulnerable persons training. And it's very specific in regard to be able to picking up these sorts of indicators. When you were talking earlier about fraud and those sorts of offences, we have lots of online learning products, we have face-to-face learning products, we have lots of activities that are there for all of our members to be able to pick up something that may help them when they go to a job, to be able to look at some of the triggers, what to look at, those sorts of things.
We are out of time, and I'm going to ask the panel if others had questions, maybe if you can stay around for a few minutes. Okay, all right, fine. But maybe you could come up and chat with them. I did want to, before we break for lunch, here's the information about lunch. Please join me, though, in thanking our panel for being here with us today.